she's got one foot and daddy ain't got none. Two folks got but 5 toes, they can't walk near mine run. Rock and roll and hopping round the place, get to drinking in the wheelchair race. 5 toes clean up, no more, no less. 5 little bees, they're missing all the rest.
Welcome back to Amputee Wisdom, where people living with limb loss share their stories, their challenges, and their success. I'm your host, Amira Radovic, and we have with us Bill Spiker. One thing that I wanted to ask was, for people who have just gotten an amputation or are going to be getting an amputation, what would you recommend that they know before?
First of all, realize you're going to have to find new patients. I'm not a patient person. Well, I've had to learn patience. One silly example too is when I got my first feet, none of my shoes would fit. So I gave away all my shoes and went down and talked to Mike Corcoran about it, and he said, "Bill, I'll give you a smaller foot." Same with leg length. I've had different lengths of legs, and that changes obviously the pant leg length. So sometimes I look like I'm in pedal pushers, and sometimes I look like I'm stumbling over my feet. So we've agreed on a length for my leg, and I now do not give away anything until I try something next, because everything changes, I guess is what I'm saying. It's just because it's one way this week does not mean that's what it's going to be 3 months from now.
I can imagine that being a challenge, making sure you have multiple shoes and multiple pants.
Well, we've zeroed in on I used to be a size 10, occasionally a 9.5. Now I just buy 10.5, and less loafers. Sometimes you got to squeeze into those a little tighter, but yeah. And it is a pain to change shoes. You don't want to change shoes 3 or 4 times a day because you have to take your legs off and use this big shoehorn. And
apart from clothing, what else would you recommend that someone who's a new amputee or is going to have an amputation prepare for?
Well, actually clothing is the first thing, even though we already talked about it a little bit. I discovered zippers, but I also, the first several months, just wore sweatpants. And I noticed somebody recommended that on the amputee support page for Facebook. They said, somebody asked that question, and they said, just use sweatpants for a while until you figure everything out. Because you're also going to be up and down a lot, and it's just, they're more comfortable. And you can get them on over the prosthetic much easier as well. Other than that, all I could say is patience and faith that you can get through it all. Some days it's pretty daunting. And as I say, fortunately, I've had very little phantom pain. When you get it, it's brutal. But you learn to adjust to everything.
Yeah. So in regards to kind of moving forward after the amputation, clothing, very, very big. It's not something you would think about, really, until you have it.
Well, one thing you just reminded me of that I've heard talked about a lot is weight gain. Fortunately, I've sort of had this always a desire to work out since back to my running days. So I very quickly found something I could do besides walking, and that's riding the bike, the life cycle. I chose the life cycle, by the way, because even though I could ride a spin bike, it wasn't as stable. And especially initially, it was hard climbing on and climbing off. Wouldn't have the problem now, but so I chose the life cycle just as a more stable device. That said, you can gain weight pretty easily because if you're used to riding a couple hundred miles a week and you're not anymore, you're going to gain weight. But a lot of people really suffer from it.
And that also changes your residual limb size.
It does.
And then
it does.
Your prosthesis.
Yeah, and not only the size, but that added weight makes things that much more uncomfortable. So, yeah, weight gain is a big concern for first year.
And staying active is the best way to just
And just got to have one beer instead of two.
just got to sacrifice the beers. Yeah, but I think that's really good advice. To like, weight gain is something that people should consider. I mean, people gain weight as you get older, anyways. And like now you have an amputation, you might not be as active as you were before. So that's just another challenge that's added to it. So just my other question is in regards to, I guess, age probably. How would you say, like, when you've lost your amputation, you were around 70?
I was 2 weeks before my 70th birthday.
70 years. And you were able to, it seems like from your story, you got your amputation, you were motivated by friends and family to just keep moving forward. You know, from people I've spoken to, it seems like a lot of younger people who have amputations are a little bit more motivated to get back out there because they're younger, but people when they get a little older, it's just like, oh, my life is done. And
well, other things gang up on you too. As I said, back problems. I've had back issues since my running days. And I have friends my age, younger and older, with really severe problems, from MS to Parkinson's to got strokes so you get old, stuff happens. And so in a way that makes it easier. I think the older you are, the easier it is to deal with limb loss because you got to give up stuff anyway. Like I say, I didn't miss running because I'd already given that up as much as I enjoyed it when I was doing it. Well, that's true of a lot of things. And by the way, that missing of the windsurfing, it's possible I couldn't do it anyway because of back problems or whatever. In fact, some of my old windsurfing buddies don't windsurf anymore. So I can complain about that, but the fact is age catches up with you anyway. So I think it's a blessing if it's got to happen, that it happens when you're older than younger. Better if you're male than female.
Very interesting.
But that's just my own personal feelings. I haven't seen that statistically or otherwise reported. But
I think that's a very interesting thought to have. And then since you've had your amputation, what is something that you've been able to do or that has happened in your life that has been positive or beneficial that wouldn't have happened if you had not gotten your amputation?
Well, I met wonderful people like you, for one thing. Yeah, you do meet interesting people. I'd say I've learned a couple of things. One is the patience I talked about. I'm not a terribly patient person normally, although I had to learn a lot of patience dealing with Carol's situation. She really, really had a tough time. And as brave as she is, it's still a tough situation. But the other thing is, as you remove things you can't do, you tend to focus more on the things you can do. And my most important endeavor there is art. That's what I am now. Somebody introduced me not too long ago as an artist, and I thought that's the best thing. It's happened to me in a long time. But I do spend a lot of time with art.
So were you an artist before your amputation, or?
I am a red-green colorblind artist who decided after about, I'm going to say, 20 hours of studio art that I wasn't going to be very good at it. So I went back to the business school. I've always had a love of it. That's how I ended up in advertising, marrying the art with the business side, and it worked out well for me. But I always was frustrated with it. So I discovered welded steel sculpture about 15 years ago, and that does not require color. So I, even though some of the recent pieces I've done are painted, but that was just an experiment. Usually I just leave it raw steel, and so I concentrate on that and really enjoy it.
And how has that been, welding and being an artiste, since you've had your amputation? I'm thinking welding is very, very physically demanding. And being a bilateral, having to stand up all the time and being over those hot sparking flames and carrying the
Well,
heavy iron?
again, sometimes it's the back that and just carrying the tanks to get the tanks refilled. But again, I would go to a wonderful place, Keen Gas, and those guys come out and get it and put it in the truck. They don't do it for anybody else, but they do it for me. So again, got some good community support there. That's still, I have to load them and unload them on this end by myself though. So yeah, and steel can be heavy, and I don't do quite as many big things as I used to, but I'm just about to start on some big stuff. So there is a physicality to it that I have to pace myself. Again, the patience things come in. I can't go out there and work 8 hours. I have to work somewhere, or I'll work for a few hours and then go do something else. But again, it's more of a back thing than a leg thing.
That makes sense. And so is this welding, is that what you do now full time? Considered full time?
Considered full time. It's the most important thing I do. Boy, if I had to say I worked 8 hours a day at it, I'd be lying, because I can't. I just can't do it. In fact, 4 hours is usually what I spend. And then I have to vary the activity. Like this morning, I did 2 or 3 different things, and I don't stick with one thing. I had a interesting person who's an occupational therapist tell me, able-bodied people shouldn't be doing repetitive things more than an hour at a time. She said even a half hour. If you're doing one thing, go take a break and do something else, because even if you're typing or a lot of things that people do all day in front of screens, don't do it.
And is there a place where we can see your art?
Well, I have a website. It needs to be redone, but it's williamspiker.com, and I have stuff all over the house here, that some of it going into a show, some of it waiting for the next show.
So we're able to see your art online at williamspiker.com.
williamspiker.com, right.
Very cool. That's really exciting. I mean, it's great that you're able to really horn on your, I wouldn't say a hobby. Is it a hobby? Would you consider it
Started out as a hobby, but it's a little more serious than that now.
It's very serious, because I've seen some of your work and it's pretty impressive.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, that's very cool. So just to kind of round up, are there any other things that you'd like to say, or recommendations, points you'd like to hit on?
Well, I can't let it go without, we can tee it up, but there's a little bit of the humor that comes with these impossible situations. And older son, both sons are musicians, but older son has a studio, and we decided on a rainy day at the beach to write a bluegrass song called 5 Toes. Carol made the observation that we only have 5 toes between the two of us. So that to me sounded like a bluegrass song. So Tom and I wrote it, and we recorded it. It needs to be edited. It's a little too long, so I won't bore you with the whole thing. But I'm gonna crank it up for you. I never mentioned the blog. I did start a blog when I got sick with, I guess it was the leukemia. My daughter-in-law Heidi decided we ought to start a blog, because when Carol was in the hospital, I would come home. She was 2 months in Christiana, 2 months at McGee. I wouldn't get home till 9:30 at night. I'd have as many as 30 voicemails, and sometimes a bunch of emails. But emails were just coming on. This was 1998, and the web was there. And one of the guys at work said, well, we'll just do a website. I said, my friends don't do websites. And so, but by the time I got sick 10 years later, everybody was using the World Wide Web. And so we started a blog. And it started out just as a serious chronology of, here's the chemotherapy I had today, and here's the reaction, and here's what's going on medically. Well, I think the first day I discovered I did not like the guy that delivered the food very well. He would mess with me. And so I started messing with him. So the food dude and I had a rivalry for a few days. And hospital stuff is just so ridiculously funny sometimes that it became a Dave Barry type of description of everyday events that you can find the humor in. And so it took on a life of its own.
And you put that in the blog?
I put everything in the blog, but I mainly look for the funny stuff. I kept serious stuff in there too, but there are a couple of classics. One was the first time I tried to get trash cans down to the curb in a wheelchair by myself.
The big trash cans?
A big trash can,
okay.
and I did really well until it got steep, and then we went flying down the trash can, and me in the wheelchair, all three of us were flying down the road, right into the middle of the road. Fortunately, there was no cars coming, but and then a couple of falls that were particularly funny, where I couldn't get up and Carol couldn't help me up, and so we had to ride around. We were in her car. Anyway, there's a bunch of silly stuff on the thing.
I think it's great that you can see the humor.
But yeah,
good outlook in life, yeah.
A lot of people say, "Wait, why don't you keep up with a blog?" And there's nothing stupid going on. There's nothing, which is a good thing. No tragedies, nothing to make a lot of fun of. So I just have not kept it up, unfortunately. But
when was the latest update?
I think we had the Easter Bunny climbing around the roof at the beach, and I put him on there. But so that was a few weeks ago. But I haven't had any serious entries in a long time.
And is the blog on your website? It's
Billy Spiker at Tumblr, I think. No, billspiker.tumblr.
I have to check it out.
It actually is helpful to some people who have had similar situations and gone back and seen them. How did you get? I've had several friends get the same type of leukemia I had, which is weird, but about 4 or 5, and they actually found it useful to go back and see what kind of treatment I got and when and how, and that was 10 years ago. So.
And one thing I wanted to hit on again was for the support group. Are you a peer mentor or?
Only in the sense that when they call me from the Wilmington rehab facility on the 6th floor, they'll call me up and say, we have a patient who would like to talk to somebody. And so I'll go down and talk to them.
Is that something you recommend, like other amputees who are doing well should do often? I find it rewarding. I mean, I love to help people, and I know when I was in that situation, I didn't know what was going to happen next, and not many people could tell you until I got down to MCOP. They would tell me what's happening, tell me how to put my pants on. I mean, little everyday things like that got to be very important. So yeah, I think mainly the service you can provide by mentoring in that, at that time and in that capacity, is you give them a little hope that life isn't over. Yeah, and you've seen that drastically change people's lives, being able to see somebody else who's been through what they're going through.
I think so. I mean, they've said that was very helpful. So.
Yeah. I can only imagine. Well, any other last minute?
No, I'll play you Five Toes whether you want to hear it or not.
Yeah, can we use it in our background?
Absolutely. That's the way you might want to. That's the way you might want to use it.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your story with us. We really enjoyed having you.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Amira.
Thanks, Billy.
Thank you for all you do.
Mama, she's got 1 foot and daddy ain't got none. 2 folks got but 5 toes, they can't walk near mine run. Rock and roll and hopping round the place, get to drinking in the wheelchair race. 5 toes clean up, no more, no less. 5 little bees, they're missing all the rest.